Calling these deaths dumb sounds cruel, but watch how they happened.
There is just no other word.
I'm Timothy, and this is the peak of underwater stupidity.
From a woman who wrapped duct tape around a cracked scuba hose and jumped in anyway, to friends who let a coin toss decide who would dive headfirst into uninspected water in the craziest way possible. It was August 12th, 2017, and the Blue Hole diving site in Florida was already crowded by mid-morning. It was a warm Saturday, the kind where the parking area fills up early and people are lined up along the edge of the sinkhole with their gear spread out on towels. Staff were doing what they always do, checking in guests and inspecting equipment before anyone got in. Maxima Gill was 44 years old. She worked in a general office position, the kind of behind-the-scenes job where you keep things organized and moving. She had been diving recreationally for a few years. Not a beginner, but not a trained professional either. People who worked around her described her as someone who pushed back hard when she felt a rule was getting in her way. She did not like being told she was wrong, especially about something she had already made up her mind about. That day she came with 2 friends, and all 3 of them were planning a relaxed weekend dive into the sinkhole. When she arrived at the entry point, a staff member checked her equipment as part of the standard routine. They found a problem almost right away. The low-pressure hose connected to her regulator had a leak.
It was small, but it was there, and the staff member told her it needed to be replaced
before she could get in the water. They had a replacement ready and offered it to her. They also told her she could wait while it was properly fixed. For most people, that would have been a straightforward situation. Small delay, problem solved, dive continues as planned. Maxima did not see it that way. She questioned the staff member's judgment and said the issue was being blown out of proportion. She did not believe a small leak was worth stopping her dive over. When the staff offered the replacement gear a second time and suggested postponing the dive, she refused again. She walked back to her car, came back with duct tape, and wrapped the damaged section of the hose herself. I honestly don't know why Maxima thought duct tape could fix a cracked air hose underwater, but she clearly believed she knew better than everyone else there. Several nearby divers watched the whole thing. The staff documented that she had been advised against entering the water and had turned down professional help before signing off on her own entry. She went in with her 2 friends. The 3 of them descended to around 85 feet below the surface. For the first few minutes, nothing seemed wrong. Then, one of her friends spotted it, bubbles leaking steadily from the taped section of the hose. The tape was already peeling back under the pressure of the depth. Her friend signaled for them to start heading up. Maxima could see what was happening. The hose was failing exactly the way the staff had warned it would. A diver nearby noticed the situation and immediately offered her a spare air source. She did not take it.
Witness accounts later suggested she appeared to hesitate,
likely believing she still had enough air left to handle the situation herself and reach the surface without needing assistance. Instead of switching over and ascending in a controlled way, she kept trying to manage the problem by herself while the air in her tank dropped rapidly. The spare source was offered to her a second time. She still did not take it. By the time she finally turned toward the surface, her tank was nearly empty. The ascent was rushed and uncontrolled. She stopped responding before she broke the surface. Her friends and the nearby diver brought her up and got her out of the water. Emergency crews responded on shore and worked on her immediately. She was pronounced dead shortly after. Investigators later concluded that the fatal event began as an out-of-air emergency and resulted in drowning before she could safely reach the surface. Officials concluded that entering the water with confirmed equipment damage had started the sequence of events, and the repeated refusal to accept help, both before the dive and during it, removed every possible way out. Maxima was warned more than once, but she kept trusting her own solution over everyone else's. The next story follows someone who was just as certain he already knew the answer. It was August 5, 2015, and out in rural Pennsylvania, there was an old abandoned quarry filled with water. There were no signs and no markers showing how deep the water was or what might be sitting under the surface. From the rocky ledges above, the water looked deep and clear, the way still water often does when you stare straight down at it from up high. Two young men had found the spot through photos online and drove out to see it for themselves. Carlo Crew was 20 years old and worked seasonal labor jobs. He had a personality that liked a challenge. If someone questioned his judgment, his instinct wasn't to slow down, it was to prove them wrong. He had never been to this quarry before, and neither had his friend. The disagreement started the moment they arrived. His friend insisted nobody should jump until they knew how deep the water really was, and that was the right call. But Carlo brushed it off, convinced the quarry was obviously deep enough just by how clear it looked. They argued back and forth, neither willing to give in.
It is heartbreaking that instead of checking the water or tossing something in to test it,
they treated it like a casual bet. They flipped a coin. Carlo lost, forcing him to be the first to test the water he insisted was safe. A few friends who were there started recording. He climbed up onto a rocky ledge overlooking the quarry. He dove in head first. From up on the ledge, the water had looked plenty deep, but just beneath the surface there was a rock shelf, a flat slab of rock that the clear water completely hid from view. He entered the water fast, the way you do coming off a headfirst dive from height, and his head struck the rock shelf almost immediately. The people watching saw a cloud of disturbed sediment spread out through the water where he went in. He didn't come back up. At first, his friends expected him to surface any second, but the seconds kept passing, and he stayed down. Panic set in fast. Two of them jumped into the quarry and swam down to find him. I think this is why clear water can be so deceptive. It looks safe, even when it isn't. They located him underwater and brought him up to shore. The injuries to his head and neck were obvious. Someone called for emergency help while they got him out. First responders arrived and tried to revive him, but the trauma was too severe. Carlo was pronounced dead. When investigators looked into it, they confirmed what had happened.
the water at the landing point was much shallower than it appeared from the ledge
because of a rock shelf hidden just below the surface. Witness recordings captured the entire sequence. The argument over the depth, the coin toss that decided who jumped first, and the dive itself. The official finding concluded that the fatal injury resulted from striking the submerged rock. In the end, the danger wasn't visible from above, but no one had taken the time to verify what was below before the jump. Looking back, it's sad to think how easily this tragedy could have been avoided. A little more caution in those few moments might have made all the difference. Carlo's mistake came from assuming something was safe without ever checking. What gets me about the next story is that the person involved had been there many times before. It was July 29, 2018, and the Pecos River in Texas had been running low for months. The drought that summer had pulled the water down far enough that rocks near the shoreline were sitting out in the open air. The river was still moving. Anyone who had been around water long enough could see that something was different. A bridge ran over the water there, and the drop from the railing down to the surface was around 35 feet. Lila Faye Fawn was 26 years old and worked in retail. She was the kind of person who kept her friend group together. She remembered the plans, she followed through, she showed up, and every summer she showed up at this bridge. The jump had started a few years back as something spontaneous, and then it just became a tradition. The same spot, the same people, the same cameras. It was the kind of thing that feels like it belongs to you after you do it enough times. I think that's actually what made her reckless. She trusted something familiar to her without ever stopping to check if it was still the same. That day, the group arrived with their phones ready to record.
The mood was relaxed and easy, the way it always was on a trip that felt like a repeat of something that had already worked.
Before anyone climbed up, one of her friends brought up the water level. The river looked lower than usual. That friend suggested checking the depth before jumping. Honestly, it was probably the smartest thing anyone said that day. Lila didn't think it was necessary. She had been jumping here for years. She knew the river. She climbed up onto the railing. Nobody else said anything after that. From the top of that bridge, the water looked fine. It was slightly murky from people moving through it earlier, which made the bottom harder to read. What Lila could not see and did not check was what was sitting just under the surface directly below the jump spot. A large rock formation had always been there, but in previous years the water had been deep enough to keep it well below where anyone would reach. That summer, with the water level this low, the gap between the surface and the rock had closed significantly. She jumped feet first from around 35 feet up. The speed of that kind of fall is not something you can slow down once you're in the air. She hit the water and kept going down, the same way she always had. Except this time the rock was there, just beneath the surface, where it had never mattered before. Witnesses on the bridge heard the impact. She did not come back up, and just like that, what had been a fun summer tradition for years turned into a fatal emergency in a matter of seconds. Her friends went in after her.
They found her in the water a short distance downstream, carried by the current.
Emergency crews responded, but the injuries she had already suffered were not survivable. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators reviewed the witness recordings and examined the area beneath the bridge. Recovery personnel later confirmed the exact location of the submerged rock and measured the water depth at the jump point. The drought had reduced the depth enough that the clearance, which had always protected her, simply no longer existed that summer. The official finding was straightforward. The decision to jump without checking current conditions, combined with the false confidence built from years of successful jumps in higher water, led directly to the fatal impact. Local residents had already commented on the unusually low river levels in the weeks leading up to the incident. The warning was available. It just wasn't looked for. Lila believed familiarity meant safety, and that assumption cost her. Up next is a diver who tried to solve a problem herself instead of listening to the people around her. It was September 3, 2016, and the reef along the Gulf Coast of Florida was one of those places that looked different every time you got in the water. It was a popular spot for recreational divers and underwater photographers because the marine life was close and the visibility was usually good. That morning, a small dive group entered the water together from a local dive operator's boat. Dory Ann Brandt was 31 years old and worked as a graphic designer. She spent most of her free time underwater with a camera. She was good at it too. Her photos were clean, well composed, and she had built up a small following of people who appreciated that kind of work. That year, she had entered a regional underwater photography competition, and she was serious about it. The problem she kept running into on earlier dives was the current.
Every time she got close to the shot she wanted, the water would push her just enough to ruin it.
She had been thinking about how to fix that for a while. I actually understand the frustration of being so close to something and having it keep slipping away, but the solution she came up with is the part that changes everything. Before she got in the water that morning, she revealed her plan to the group. She had brought a rope. Her idea was to tie one end around her ankle and attach the other end to something fixed near the reef. That way, she thought, the current couldn't move her while she was trying to shoot. The dive guide on the boat told her directly not to do it. Other divers in the group heard the exchange and decided against copying the setup. Dory didn't argue loudly, but she didn't change her mind either. She entered the water with the rope and her camera. Once the group spread out over the reef, Dory found a structure she liked and anchored herself to it the way she had planned. For a little while it worked. She was stable, she was shooting, and the current wasn't pulling her around the way it usually did. She was getting what she came for. Then the current shifted, pushing her away from her original position. The loose rope drifted into the reef and snagged. She tried to reposition herself, but the line tightened with each movement. The knot ended up behind her ankle, and despite several attempts, she couldn't reach it properly. With no cutting tool and the rope cinching tighter as she struggled, she couldn't free herself. This is the moment where I think the camera should have been the last thing on her mind, but based on what witnesses said, she was still holding it while trying to work the rope free. She spent several minutes trying to untangle herself. The other divers had spread out to different sections of the reef and didn't immediately notice she wasn't moving. Her air supply was going down the whole time.
By the time divers backtracked and found her, she had already stopped moving.
They cut the rope and brought her to the surface. Emergency responders met the boat, but she could not be revived. Investigators examined the recovered rope and documented the reef formations where the tangle had occurred. The pattern of knots and the sections of reef involved told a clear story of how the line had wrapped progressively tighter as she tried to move. Witnesses confirmed that the dive guide had warned her before the dive and that other divers had declined to use the same setup after hearing the warning. The official conclusion identified the self-made tether as the direct cause of the entrapment. Her air ran out while she was restrained and unable to reach help. No equipment malfunctioned. No unusual conditions contributed. The rope did exactly what a rope does when it catches on something underwater. It held. Dory's plan worked exactly the way she expected, right up until it didn't. The next story begins with a split-second accident that should have ended with nothing more than frustration. It was May 11th, 2018, and the Mississippi River was moving fast and high near a bridge in Missouri, the way it usually does in spring when all the runoff comes down. From up on the bridge, the water didn't look particularly threatening, but big rivers can be deceptive. Beneath the surface, powerful currents and undertows were moving much faster than they appeared, creating dangers that weren't obvious from a quick glance. I think many people underestimate rivers because calm water looks harmless, even though some of the world's most dangerous water shows no obvious signs of danger. The current near the bridge supports was strong that day, even though it didn't look like much from where people were standing. Esther Grantham was 29 years old and worked in marketing. She was the kind of person who documented everything: outings, trips, little moments, usually with a brand new, expensive phone.
That afternoon, she was up on the bridge taking photos with a group of people around.
While she was holding the phone out to get a shot, it slipped out of her hand. Witnesses watched it drop all the way down and disappear into the river. I think most of us know the feeling of losing something expensive, but sometimes the right choice is to let it go, not risk your life trying to get it back. Her friends told her right away to forget about it. The phone was gone, but Esther kept saying how much it had cost, that it was too expensive to just let go. The river looked calm from up there, and I think that's what convinced her she could get it back. Instead of walking away, she climbed down toward a maintenance area near the bridge supports, the part of the structure that sits closer to the water. A few people around started recording, watching to see what she would do. She believed she'd be quick, in and out, grab the phone, come back. That was the whole plan. She entered the river near the supports, and the difference between what she expected and what was actually there became clear almost immediately. The current that had looked so gentle from the bridge was much stronger down at the surface. It started pulling her right away. Witnesses said she tried to move toward the spot where the phone had gone in, but the water wasn't letting her hold any position at all. It was carrying her downstream from the moment she got in. She struggled to keep herself in place. People on shore and on the bridge started shouting instructions, and several of them called for help. But she kept drifting farther from the entry point. The current near a bridge support like that doesn't just push you along. It pulls in ways that are hard to fight, even for a strong swimmer. And Esther had no equipment. No life vest, nothing. She drifted behind a stretch of rougher water, and the people watching lost sight of her. She did not resurface where anyone could see.
Search crews were sent out quickly once the calls came in.
They located her body downstream. Hours later, the phone she went in for was never found. Investigators looked into the incident and found no sign of foul play. The The witness recordings clearly showed her dropping the phone and then deliberately entering the river to try to get it back. Examiners confirmed that the current near the bridge supports was far stronger than it appeared from above, and that it had overwhelmed her almost as soon as she entered. The official finding was simple and hard to hear. She drowned after entering dangerous water to recover a replaceable object. What gets me about Esther's story is that she went after something completely replaceable. Brian's story starts with another shortcut that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. It was February 22nd, 2016, and the Tarcoles River in Costa Rica was known for its large crocodiles. Warning signs and local guides regularly warned visitors about the danger. That afternoon, a small group of tourists was hiking near the river, trying to reach a viewing area before the sun went down. Brian Moody was 34 years old and worked in sales. He was on vacation with a group of friends, and he had that energy a lot of confident people have. Quick to make a decision, quick to act, not really the type to slow down and overthink things. The group had been walking for a while and wanted to get to their spot before it got dark.
There was a proper crossing point nearby, the safe way across.
But using it meant about 10 extra minutes of walking. When they reached the river, Brian looked at the water and figured swimming straight across would be faster than taking the long way around. His friends told him not to do it. The warning signs were right there. The guides had already talked about the crocodiles. What I find frustrating is that nobody failed to warn him. The warnings were everywhere. But Brian had made up his mind, and the more people pushed back, the more set he seemed to get. A few other tourists who were nearby stopped to watch what was happening. He backed up from the edge to get a running start. By that point, I think he had already convinced himself it was safe. He dove into the river near the bank and came up swimming toward the other side. For a few seconds, it looked like it might just be a quick crossing after all. Then the people watching from shore noticed movement under the surface close to where he had gone in. It happened fast. A large crocodile struck from below, the way they hunt, silent, sudden, coming up from underneath where you can't see it. It seized him and pulled him under almost immediately. There was violent splashing near the surface. Witnesses briefly saw the animal still holding on before Brian disappeared completely beneath the water. Nobody on shore could do anything. Getting into that river to help would have meant a second person facing the exact same danger, and everyone there knew it.
Someone called for help right away, but there was nothing anyone could do but watch the water.
The attack was over before any emergency responders could arrive. Recovery teams searched the area afterward, and human remains were eventually found downstream a considerable distance from where he had entered. The search took time, and the people who had been with him spent those hours knowing how it would end. Authorities confirmed that the injuries were consistent with a crocodile attack. The witnesses all told the same story, that Brian had chosen to swim across the river instead of using the marked crossing, and that he had been warned multiple times before he entered the water. There was nothing unusual about the crocodile's behavior. It did exactly what crocodiles in that river are known to do, in the exact place where signs warned people not to enter. The official finding pointed to a single decision as the cause, choosing to swim through known crocodile habitat to save a few minutes of walking. The safe crossing was right there. The warnings were right there. The guides had said it plainly, and his own friends had begged him to stop. Local operators temporarily closed off access to that stretch of the river while the recovery was carried out. In the end, the 10 minutes he was trying to save cost him everything. I think this story is a reminder that sometimes the shortest route can end up being the most expensive one. Brian ignored a safer option because he wanted the faster one. The next case isn't about saving time. It's about refusing to back down when everyone is watching. It was June 16th, 2017, and it was a hot night in Las Vegas. Up on the roof of a building, there was a swimming pool, and above the pool, there was a raised terrace with a ledge. From that ledge down to the water was a real drop. A private weekend celebration was happening up there late at night, with a group of friends, music, and drinks going around. Alyssa Sells was 24 years old and worked as a bartender. She was social, fun, and liked being part of whatever was going on. She wasn't someone who looked for trouble. She was just someone who didn't like backing down when people were watching. That night, she was there to celebrate with friends and enjoy the party. Nothing more than that. At some point, someone dared Alyssa to jump from the terrace ledge into the pool below. People started arguing about whether it could even be done. Some said it was possible. Others said it was way too far and too dangerous, that you'd have to clear a stretch of concrete deck before you ever reached the water. While they argued, more people pulled out their phones and started recording.
The whole thing turned into the main event of the night. The group wasn't debating whether it was a good idea.
They were debating whether it was physically possible. At first, Alyssa hesitated. You could tell she wasn't sure, but the encouragement kept coming. The crowd kept growing, and the pressure built up the way it does in those moments where everyone's looking at you and waiting. Before any of the staff up there could step in and stop it, she climbed up onto the ledge. I think a lot of people underestimate how powerful that kind of social pressure can be when everyone is watching and nobody wants to be the person who backs down. People started counting down. She pushed off and launched herself out toward the pool. For the first part of the fall, it actually looked like it might work, like she might just clear the deck and hit the water. But as she dropped, it became obvious she wasn't going to make it far enough. The distance she needed to cover was more than a person could jump. She came down short of the pool and struck the concrete deck instead. The impact caused severe injuries right away. Her friends rushed over to her, and several of the recordings caught the whole thing. Someone called for help within seconds. Security cameras on the property also captured the sequence from start to finish. Responders got there quickly, and the people who had been cheering moments earlier were suddenly silent and scrambling to help. Despite everything, Alyssa died from the injuries she suffered in the fall. When investigators reviewed the case, the evidence was all there in plain sight. The phone videos and the building's security footage showed exactly what happened: that she jumped from the terrace, came down short, and never reached the water at all.
Examiners confirmed her injuries came from striking the concrete deck,
not from anything in the pool. There was no structural failure, no broken railing, nothing wrong with the building itself. The official finding was that the death resulted from an attempted jump that was far beyond what could reasonably be expected to be survivable given the height and distance involved. The conclusion noted the role of the crowd, the dare, and the alcohol in pushing the situation forward. In the end, a jump that a group of people stood around debating turned out to be one that simply could not be made. And the pressure to not back down in front of friends who only egged her on cost Alyssa her life. Alyssa's fate was sealed the moment she let the crowd influence her decision. The final story begins with a debate that could have been settled in a much smarter way.